Imagine this. You want to run for president. You've got the ideas, you've got the passion, but then someone tells you, sorry, you just can't afford to. Sounds crazy, right? Well, today we're digging into a question that gets to the very core of what a democracy is supposed to be. So let's really ask ourselves, what does it take to run for president? Do you need a famous last name, millions of pesos stashed away? Or is just having a real, genuine desire to serve the country enough? This is the fundamental question, because it's all about the real barriers to entry for the highest office in the land. Okay, so to keep our elections from becoming a total free-for-all, there are rules. And there are official gatekeepers who enforce those rules. Let's pull back the curtain and see exactly how they operate. Now, one of the biggest tools in their toolbox is something called the nuisance candidate rule. It's right there in the Omnibus Election Code, and it basically says you can be disqualified for a few reasons. One, if you're just trying to make a mockery of the whole thing. Two, if you're trying to confuse voters, like maybe you have a super similar name to a famous candidate. And three, if you don't have a bona fide, that's a fancy way of saying a good faith, intention to actually run. All right, so that's the rule on paper, but how does it work in the real world? This is where the story gets really interesting. Let's talk about a guy named Juan Olesca, an entrepreneur who one day decided, you know what, I'm going to run for president. So on one side, you have Juan Olesca, this independent entrepreneur with a presidential dream. And on the other side, the Commission on Elections, or COMELEC. And they straight up declared him a nuisance candidate and canceled his candidacy. Just like that. It was a total David versus Goliath showdown, but fought over a spot on the ballot. So you have to ask, what was COMELEC's big reason for shutting him down? Well, here it is, and I'm quoting here. They said he failed to show that he had the financial capacity to sustain a decent and viable nationwide campaign on his own. And get this, that was it. That one argument was their entire case against him. And you know, this wasn't just a one-time thing. What COMELEC did here basically created this unofficial checklist. It's like they were saying, want to be a serious candidate? You need deep pockets, you need to be in a big political party, and you'd better have nationwide name recognition. And we know this because they use the exact same logic against a candidate for vice president, a guy named Wilson Ahmad. So you can see a pattern was definitely starting to form here. But Olesca didn't just walk away. No, this story doesn't end with the Election Commission. This case went all the way to the top, to the Philippine Supreme Court. And that's where everything boiled down to one simple but absolutely massive constitutional question. Do you legally need to be rich to run for president of the Philippines? Is that what the law says? And the Supreme Court's answer? A clear, loud, emphatic no. In their landmark ruling, and for those taking notes, it's GR number 258449, the court said that judging a candidate on their lack of money effectively imposed a property qualification that is inconsistent with the Constitution. In other words, you can't create a wealth requirement that the Constitution itself doesn't have. Okay, but here's the part that might make you scratch your head. The 2022 election was already in the history books by the time the court made this decision, so why bother? Why rule on a case when the race is already run and won? Well, it's because of a really interesting legal idea. It's called capable of repetition yet evading review. It's a bit of a mouthful, but what it means is that courts can rule on an issue that's technically over if two things are true. One, the problem is so short-lived, like an election season, that you can't get a final court ruling in time. And two, the same exact problem is probably going to happen again. The Supreme Court was basically saying, we're going to settle this now so we don't have to deal with it in every single future election.
Okay, so if not having money isn't a good enough reason to call someone a nuisance candidate, then what is? Where is the actual line? Let's get clear on that.
It all makes a lot more sense when you compare this case to another one. Look, for Olesca and Ahmad, the problem was money, and the Supreme Court said, nope, that's an unconstitutional property requirement. But then you have the Degamo case. There, a candidate was disqualified because their name was so similar to another candidate's that it was causing real confusion for voters. And in that situation, the court said the disqualification was valid. Why? Because the goal there was to stop the election from becoming a confusing mess. See the difference? One is about your wallet. The other is about protecting the integrity of the vote itself. So let's zoom out. What's the big takeaway here? What does this landmark ruling mean for democracy as a whole?
The Supreme Court couldn't have been clearer. The real qualification to run for office, well, it's not in your wallet.
It's in your bona fide intent. That's the key. The court is saying that what really truly matters is whether you have a genuine, good faith desire to run and to serve. That's it. Not how big your bank account is or how famous you are. So, by knocking down this financial barrier, the court has really reinforced the right of every citizen to run for office. Which leaves us with a huge question for the future, right? What does this actually mean for our elections moving forward? Are we going to see a whole new wave of more diverse candidates? Or are there still other invisible barriers, other unwritten rules that quietly decide who really gets a shot at leading the country?